Hello, my friend. Welcome back to Timeless English Stories. Take a slow breath, settle into your place, and let this story carry you across time. And before we begin, please subscribe to Timeless English Stories right now. We share a new true story every single day. We always keep this same gentle pace. We are always here to help you learn English naturally. It is a cold night in 1945. A young woman lies under a big army truck. Her hands are covered in black oil. She holds a small metal tool. Around her, other soldiers work too. The garage is dark and quiet. Only one small lamp gives light. She listens closely to the engine. Something is wrong deep inside it. She touches a broken part with her fingers. Metal clinks softly in the dark. The smell of oil fills the air. A truck engine hums quietly nearby. Outside, the night is silent. No planes fly above tonight. No bombs fall tonight either. There is only cold wind. There are only tired soldiers, resting after a long day of work. She does not stop working. She checks every single piece. She wants to find the problem herself. No one helps her right now. No one really needs to. She has learned this skill slowly. She learned it step by step. Her overalls are dirty and stained. Her face has a small black mark. She looks like any young mechanic, but she is not like the others. Very few people know who she is. What had brought her to this garage? What was she really doing here? Why was she so far from a palace on this cold, quiet night? This young woman with oily hands became famous later in life. She became one of the most famous queens in the world. She ruled her country for more than 70 years. People across the globe knew her face well. Newspapers, coins, and stamps all carried her picture. But almost no one remembers this quiet night. Almost no one remembers this cold garage. Her name was Elizabeth. Stay with me, my friend. This is Elizabeth. This is a story that will take us across an entire lifetime. Elizabeth was born in London in 1926. She was the first child of her parents. Her father was the Duke of York then. At that time, no one expected her to rule. Her uncle was next in line for the throne. But everything changed suddenly in 1936. That year, her uncle gave up the throne. He wanted to marry a woman. The government did not accept this marriage, so her uncle stepped down completely. Suddenly, Elizabeth's father became King George VI. Elizabeth was only 10 years old then. Now she was next in line herself. She would one day rule instead of just watch from the side. Her quiet childhood had just changed forever. 3 years later, in 1939, war began. Germany attacked Poland that September. Britain joined the war very soon after. Elizabeth was only 13 years old. Her whole world changed once again. German planes started bombing British cities. This bombing became known as the Blitz. Every single night, sirens filled the sky. Families ran fast to underground shelters. Buildings burned through many long nights. More than 40,000 British people died during the Blitz. On some nights, hundreds of bombs fell on London alone. Whole streets disappeared in just 1 hour. Children slept in cold underground train stations. Many families lost their homes completely. Nearly 1.5 million children were sent away from cities in 1939 alone. They left big cities for small towns and villages. Some carried only one small suitcase each. Many of them never saw their homes again. King George VI faced a hard choice. He needed to protect his family. He also needed to lead his country. He decided to move his daughters. Elizabeth and her sister Margaret left London. They went to live at Windsor Castle. It was much safer there than London. It was still far from the worst bombing. Many other British children moved away too. They moved far from their own parents. This was a strange, difficult time for everyone. Even the king and queen often stayed in London during the day. They wanted to support the tired, frightened city. King George VI faced his own personal struggle too. Since he was young, he found public speaking very hard. Still, he gave radio speeches to comfort the whole nation. Elizabeth watched her father push through his fear, again and again. Danger came close to the royal family too. Buckingham Palace itself was bombed 9 times. Once, a bomb fell into the palace garden. The king and queen were inside at that moment. No one in the family was hurt that day, but the danger felt very real to everyone. From that moment, Elizabeth understood war was not just news on the radio, but King George VI was not only a king, he was also a worried father. Like many fathers, he feared for his children. He wanted Elizabeth completely safe from danger. He did not want her near soldiers. He did not want her near weapons. He did not want her near any war zone. This protection came from real, deep love, but it also built a kind of wall. This wall stood between Elizabeth and the world. Have you ever had someone protect you so much that it felt like a wall too? This wall would not stand forever, though. Elizabeth had her own strong ideas about duty. She believed a princess should help her country. She did not want to simply hide safely. She did not want to hide behind palace walls. Her father's fear and her sense of duty would meet again and again. They would meet face to face, all through the long war. Life at Windsor Castle was strange during those years. Soldiers guarded every door and gate. Windows were covered with thick, dark cloth at night. Everyone carried a small gas mask at all times. Food was carefully rationed for every single family. Even the king and queen ate simple, small meals. Elizabeth grew up watching her whole country give things up together. Elizabeth's childhood was very different from other children's lives. She never went to a normal school. Instead, private teachers came to her home every day. She studied history at home. She studied mathematics and languages too. She rarely played with children outside her family. This was the first closed door in her life. She could not go to school like other girls. There was a second closed door too. Royal rules were very strict back then. Women in the royal family did not join the army. They did not work with dirty machines. This was especially true for the future queen. Safety always came first for a future queen or king. Many people believed a princess should stay away. She should stay away from danger and hard tools. She should stay away from any physical labor. Rules felt even stricter for Elizabeth than for her sister. As the future queen, every choice she made mattered more. People watched her much more closely than they watched Margaret. But even as a child, Elizabeth showed one clear strength. She loved machines more than most young girls did. She loved anything with wheels and engines. As a young girl, she often took apart toy cars. She wanted to see how they worked inside. She fixed her own broken toys by herself. She asked question after question about how things moved. At Windsor, Elizabeth also joined a small girl guides group. There, she learned simple outdoor skills. Like other ordinary girls, she learned to light fires and tie knots carefully. This curious mind about practical skills mattered later in her life. It would matter very much years later. At the same time, Elizabeth had a real weakness too. She had lived a very protected, quiet life. She had never done hard physical work before. She had never fixed a real engine, only small toys. She had never worked long hours in a garage. Being so protected made her, in some ways, not ready. She was not ready for the harder world outside her palace. Elizabeth also loved horses since she was very small. She learned to ride at only 3 years old. She spent many hours in the stables near the palace. She learned to care for the horses herself. She fed them, brushed them, and cleaned their stables. She did this work herself, every single day, and she never complained. This early love of hard, careful work stayed with her forever. This mix of strength and weakness shaped everything that came next. She had the natural, curious mind of a mechanic. But she did not yet have real experience. She would need to learn everything herself. She would learn it step by step, piece by piece. This is the same way anyone learns a hard new skill. In October 1940, something completely new happened. The BBC radio asked Elizabeth to speak. She was only 14 years old then. Thousands of children across Britain had been sent away. They had been sent away from cities like London. They now lived far from their own parents. They lived in strange houses, out in the countryside. The BBC wanted Elizabeth to speak directly to them. King George VI felt very worried about this plan. He did not want his daughter exposed publicly. He wanted every single word planned carefully. Radio staff wrote a careful, formal speech for her. They wanted her to read it exactly as written. They did not want any changes at all. Elizabeth herself felt nervous before the radio talk, too. She sat in a small room with a single microphone. Her hands felt cold and a little shaky. Speaking to millions of strangers felt very frightening. She remembered her father's own struggle with speaking. If he could push through his fear, so could she. Have you ever had to speak in public, even when you felt afraid inside? But Elizabeth had her own quiet idea about this. She wanted to speak to the children warmly. She did not want to sound like a distant princess. When the moment came, she read most of the words calmly. But then she did something a little different. She added her own simple, personal words. She turned to her younger sister Margaret nearby. She said a warm, personal goodnight to her. Live, on the radio, in front of the whole listening country. Millions of families listened at home that night. Many parents cried quietly by their radios. For the first time, people felt close to this princess. She was not just a picture on a poster anymore. She sounded like a real girl, speaking from her heart. This small decision mattered more than anyone expected. Elizabeth had shown, at only 14, that she could act on her own. She could think for herself, even inside a formal system. She could add something personal to a royal radio talk. It was a small act at the time, but it was also an early, important sign. In the days after, hundreds of letters arrived at the palace. Children from across the country wrote back to her. It showed the strong queen who thought for herself, the one she would become. For the next 5 long years, Elizabeth mostly watched the war. She watched it from a safe distance instead. She stayed inside the safe walls of Windsor Castle. She heard about bombs falling on London. She heard about soldiers fighting far away. She had never seen these places herself, but she could not join them out there. She could only watch through a castle window. She waited quietly there, hoping, feeling far away from any real action. Every report from the front felt distant and slow to arrive. Have you ever felt that you were only watching? Have you ever watched important things happen from far away, like through a window? Tell me about it in the comments below. By 1945, Elizabeth was 18 years old. The war had already lasted 6 long years. She felt it was finally time to act. She no longer wanted to only watch from a window. She wanted to join the war effort directly. Other young women were already doing this across Britain. She asked her father for special permission. She wanted to join the Auxiliary Territorial Service. People simply called this group the ATS. This was a branch of the British Army built for women. At first, King George VI firmly said no. He still wanted to protect her from danger. He still wanted to protect her from hard, dirty work. This was the very same wall from years before. It stood between them once again, now, in 1945. But Elizabeth did not give up this time. She asked her father again, and then again. Finally, in February 1945, he agreed. Elizabeth became Second Subaltern Elizabeth Windsor. Her official military number was 230873. For the first time in her whole life, people did not call her princess. They simply called her by a number instead, just like every other soldier there. She trained at an army camp near Aldershot. It was a town south of London. Every single day, she learned real, hard skills. She learned to drive large military trucks. She drove them through narrow country roads, in rain and thick fog. She learned to read complicated engine drawings. She learned to take apart a whole truck engine. She took it apart piece by piece. Then she put it back together correctly. Training days started early, often before sunrise. Elizabeth woke up in a cold room, just like the other women. She ate simple food in a busy canteen. She wore the same rough green uniform as everyone. She learned to change a heavy truck tire alone. Her hands grew small, hard, rough spots from the tools. Mud covered her boots after every training session. At first, some other soldiers felt unsure around her. A senior mechanic taught her the hardest lessons personally. He showed her every part of the engine slowly. He did not treat her gently, and she liked that. After just a few days of hard training, the other women treated her like any other soldier. Soon, her hands were covered in black oil again. It was just like that cold night in the garage. But now, this dirty work was not secret anymore. Other young soldiers trained right beside her. They watched her working hard, just like them. Can you imagine a future queen fixing a truck engine? Can you imagine her doing this with her own 2 hands? This training changed something important inside Elizabeth. She was no longer only a princess who watched from windows. She was now a young woman with real, useful skills. She could fix a broken machine herself now. She had real skill, patience, and 2 very capable hands. On May 8, 1945, the war in Europe finally ended. This day became known as VE Day. It meant Victory in Europe Day for everyone. Huge, joyful crowds gathered outside Buckingham Palace in London. People sang loudly together in the streets. People danced together, arm in arm. Church bells rang out across the whole country. After 6 long years, the fighting in Europe was finally over. Millions of families could finally stop waiting in fear. The king and queen appeared on the palace balcony that day. The crowd cheered loudly every time they stepped outside. Inside the palace, Elizabeth watched the celebration from a window. She watched it with her sister and her parents. But simply watching was not enough for her. Not anymore. She asked her father for one more request. She wanted to go outside, into the crowd. She wanted to feel like an ordinary young woman, just for one night. Again, King George VI stopped, unsure at first. The streets outside were full of strangers. It felt risky for 2 young royal princesses, but this time, finally, he said yes. He allowed a small group of trusted officers to join them. Elizabeth and Margaret quietly left the palace. They walked out through a small side door. Outside, thousands of happy people filled every street. No one in the crowd recognized these 2 young women. Elizabeth pulled her cap down low over her eyes. The group walked all the way to Trafalgar Square. They also walked along a busy street called the Mall. Strangers offered them cups of tea and sweets. Someone gave Elizabeth a small paper flag to wave. For a few precious hours, she was not a princess at all. She was simply another happy face in a huge, cheering crowd. She sang songs loudly with complete strangers that night. She linked arms with soldiers she had never met. She laughed and danced freely in the street. This was the very first time in her whole life. The small group stayed outside for many hours, walking from street to street, until very late into the night. Years later, she still remembered this single night clearly. She called it one of the most joyful nights of her whole life. For a few short hours, everything felt equal and simple. The same young woman who once worked alone under a dark truck now stood shoulder to shoulder with her whole country. They celebrated together as one simple, happy, ordinary crowd. 2 years later, in 1947, Elizabeth married Prince Philip. Thousands of people watched the wedding at Westminster Abbey. Life slowly began to feel normal again after the war, but this peaceful time would not last very long. 7 years later, in February 1952, Elizabeth was far from home. She was visiting Kenya with her husband, Prince Philip. This was part of a long royal tour. Early one quiet morning, terrible news suddenly arrived. Her father, King George VI, had died in his sleep. This happened quietly, overnight, without any warning at all. He was only 56 years old at the time. Elizabeth had to fly back to Britain immediately. There was no time to wait or prepare. She was only 25 years old herself. In just one single day, everything changed completely. She stopped being a princess forever that day. She became Queen Elizabeth II instead. There was no time to slowly prepare for this. There was no quiet, gentle goodbye to her father. She stepped off the plane in London, wearing simple black clothes. Waiting officials already called her Your Majesty for the very first time. Within days, she moved out of her family's old home. She moved into Buckingham Palace, her new official home. She signed important papers on her very first morning as queen. There was no gentle change and no extra time to grieve quietly. She had learned duty in a cold garage years before. Now, that same quiet duty carried her through her hardest week. She had grown up watching her father lead the country. She had watched him lead through a long, hard war. Now, suddenly, that same heavy duty belonged only to her. She carried it alone, starting that very same day. Elizabeth was crowned queen in 1953. Millions of people watched the ceremony on early television sets. She went on to rule for more than 70 years. This was longer than any other British king or queen in history. She met world leaders from every corner of the globe. She saw 15 different British prime ministers during her long reign. She also led a group of more than 50 countries. People called this group the Commonwealth of Nations. The country celebrated her Silver Jubilee in 1977. It celebrated her Golden Jubilee in 2002. It celebrated her Platinum Jubilee in 2022, just months before she died. In 1997, after Princess Diana's sudden death, the whole nation grieved deeply. Many people wanted the Queen to speak publicly right away. She listened carefully, then gave a rare live speech to comfort the country. Once again, she chose direct, personal words over silence. Away from public life, she raised 4 children. She also kept many small corgi dogs at home. These dogs became almost as famous as she was. She finally passed away on September 8, 2022. She was 96 years old when she died. Why did this quiet queen become so deeply respected? 3 clear things from her early life help explain this. First, that radio talk back in 1940 taught her something important. At only 14, she learned to connect with ordinary people. Second, her hard, dirty training in the ATS taught her real patience. It taught her practical skill, not just royal ideas from books. Third, her father's slow, careful trust taught her something too. It taught her that duty must be earned through real action. Real duty is not simply given by birth alone. Together, these 3 lessons built a queen the public could trust. They saw her not just as a symbol, but as someone who had truly worked. They remembered her, in some quiet way, as the young woman who once sang and danced among them on VE Day. If Elizabeth lived in our modern world today, things might look different. Perhaps her secret night in that garage would not stay secret for long. Perhaps a photo of her oily hands would spread across social media right away. Perhaps millions of people would see it within minutes. But in her own time, things moved much more slowly. There was no instant fame, no quick online praise. She first quietly proved herself through real, hard work. She did this long before the whole world learned her name. And so, my friend, this story comes gently to its close. Let's return to that cold night in the garage, one last time. A young woman, her hands covered in oil, alone, under a broken truck engine. Back then, those oily hands felt like a small, private secret. They were hidden from the whole world outside that garage. Years later, those very same hands wore a heavy golden ring. She wore it proudly on the day she became queen. Those same hands waved calmly to crowds for over 70 years. They waved again and again, across many, many years. They shook the hands of presidents, workers, and children alike. The oil and the gold both belonged to the very same two hands. They belonged to the very same quiet, steady strength underneath them. Elizabeth never learned to fix an engine in just one day. She learned it piece by piece, mistake by mistake. She learned it slowly, night after night, in a cold garage. Learning English works in exactly the same simple way. You do not need perfect grammar today, right now, this very moment. You only need one small piece of practice every day. This is just like Elizabeth learning her engines, one part at a time. She did not wait to feel ready before she started. She simply picked up her tools and began. You can do the very same thing with English, starting today. Now tell me, my friend, if you were Elizabeth, what would you have chosen? Would you have chosen to stay safe inside the palace? Or would you have chosen the cold garage instead? Would you have chosen real, hands-on work over comfort and safety? Tell me your honest answer in the comments below. Until tomorrow, my friend, take care of yourself and never stop learning.